My name is Philip Deng. I live in North Beacon Hill. I'm 31. I've grown up all over the United States, and right now I lead a local nonprofit called Market Share here in Seattle. And what we're trying to do is turn King Street Station downtown into an international street food market that gives low-income immigrants and refugees a place to start a small food business. It gives them opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have to be entrepreneurs. And then for the rest of our community, it's a place to first and foremost have really, really great, diverse, delicious food, but also connect as a community over culture.
Nice.
That was really good.
How do you define culture?
I've been thinking about that since about 2 minutes ago when you started priming me. I have lots of thoughts, but I don't know if... Well, I guess you didn't ask me for the definition of culture, but mine, huh?
Mm-hmm.
I think culture is... It's the flavor that arises from how different groups around the world create their societies and create their communities. So there's a function that underlies a lot of culture, I think. The ways that we cook, the ways that we govern, the ways that we associate and build and assemble. I think these are all aspects of culture. But then I think when we reference culture, it's almost like we're referencing flavors or genres, because there's so many different kinds of culture. And I mean, you can really look at any group of people. You could look at team culture, office culture, American culture, Asian American culture. So these are all groups and how they associate, how they communicate and build and create and fulfill whatever their mission is. It's the way they do it, I think, is how I would interpret culture.
For sure. How did you get to Seattle?
I came to Seattle for the first time in 2000 with my dad. The two of us came from Minnesota. My parents had divorced a few years before that, and my mother stayed there with my brother, and now I have a sister as well. And then my father and I came out here because he's originally from the West Coast, and his law firm has an office here. And so he was looking for a start, and I think my folks decided that both parents really wanted to be involved and wanted to be parents very actively. So I think that's how they split us, and that was really tough and has had a big impact on all of us. But that's how my dad and I came out to Seattle. We ended up on Mercer Island. That's where he still lives. So I went to Mercer Island High School for 4 years. But then I was gone for 8 years and came back in 2012. And I've been here ever since then.
Nice. Tell me about the cultures that you personally identify with and the cultures that inspire you.
I identify as an Asian American. For people who can't see me or don't know me, I'm Chinese American. My father's family, his parents were from a region of southern China, and my mother's parents were from more northern coastal China. So distinct there, but in this country, definitely I identify as Asian. It has a major influence on my life. I think politically, I have an identity that I have an affinity with, more progressive. A lot of, I think, at least the ideas that are talked about in Seattle, being more progressive, accepting, kind of looking at how we can better relate to one another and look globally, kind of beyond boundaries that have existed, or at least evaluating whether these boundaries are really relevant between us. I also identify as an entrepreneur. I'm 3.5 years into running Market Share, which is a group I started. To the best of my knowledge, I think I'm having a very typical entrepreneurial experience. It's been a real struggle. I kind of wouldn't have it any other way. And I think I've heard it described similarly. It's been an enormous amount of sacrifice, but at the same time, I get more in learning back than I think I've ever gotten per day in my life. And so I think I now have sort of a culture of entrepreneurship that I understand a little bit in terms of how I make decisions, how I spend my resources, how I lead, how I talk about what I do. So there's definitely that. I'm finishing up a program called Leadership Tomorrow here in Seattle, which is a pretty cool group that focuses on the principles of servant leadership, really just how to be a trustee or a custodian of your community and how to make it a better place for everybody, a more sustainable place. This year we really focused on racial equity. So more so, I think I am trying to understand positive leadership culture. So that's another one that I'm beginning to identify with. And the cultures that inspire me, this is going to sound a little bit general and a little bit cliche, but groups that are marginalized and still prevail, whether it's a racial group or if you experience a disability. Or I spent first year out of college as a volunteer teacher in the Marshall Islands. So very distinct culture, but only about 60,000 people in the entire country, and it's a very small country, and it's a low-lying island nation. So, recent talks about climate change is they're on the front lines. I mean, they're literally going to be underwater. So that's a culture that is old, distinct, but also under threat, very vulnerable. So the folks doing work to advocate for them, I think your question was about inspiring cultures. Yeah. So that's kind of one example of a culture that really takes work, that you really have to put that on every day and wear it. Whereas I think there are more passive cultures. It's pretty easy for me to be liberal in Seattle, so it's not something that I have to work really hard to. For sure. So I wouldn't be inspired by my own liberalism here, Right. So something that takes a little bit of guts to do.
Do you have a background in business?
I have no background in business. I've actually only done work in the nonprofit and public sector. So I did nonprofit work as a volunteer teacher for 2 years, then a program coordinator, still with a nonprofit, but doing sort of human environmental work for another year or so. Then I had some political campaign experience on the 2012 Obama campaign. And then I worked for 2 years for U.S. Senator Patty Murray here in her Seattle office, just downtown. And I was doing constituent services. So a lot of folks don't know that you can call up or go to your elected officials and they can help you out. If you have sort of any matters that concern federal agencies, they have caseworkers who can help you out with that stuff. So I was doing work in Senator Murray's office. And it was in my evenings that I started Market Share. So yeah, doing this with no business background.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what inspired you to start Market Share? Or was it like an event or a moment where you thought, why don't we have this in Seattle?
That was how the original vision of a market came into my mind. It was during the campaign in 2012. I had the 37th legislative district. The northern half of it was my assignment. So I was in Yesler Terrace, where there's a large Somali immigrant population, and it was Ramadan. Actually, it's Ramadan now, so a few years ago, and they were cooking the food that they would break fast with each night, but they're cooking something out on their grills in the backyard. I think it was like a stew. And it was one of the most delicious smelling things. And I'm wandering around this neighborhood for hours, and I'm like really hungry. And I got to talking to this woman about what that was and where I could try it. And she just said, nowhere. This is just stuff we have at home. This is community food. This is our food. There's no restaurants. So in that moment, I thought back to Asian street food culture when I lived in China for 3 years. I got to travel to Thailand and several parts of China, and I just thought back to all the nights that I'd spent with friends just eating at markets and hanging out and all that time. And I just thought, if we had a space like that in Seattle where this woman could start a little spot selling that stew, I think a lot of people would go there. So I envisioned this, what looks kind of like a food hall in my head, but really built with a mission to lower barriers to allow immigrants and refugees to start their businesses, not just like a gourmet sort of designer spot. But it took a few more years to decide to start Market Share because I didn't really know how I would build that market. And what finally clicked was a friend of mine. I was applying to business school and I was writing an essay about why I wanted to go to business school. So I was talking about starting this nonprofit to build this market after I go to business school and learn how to do it. And she said, why don't you just do it? Like I had laid out all the steps. She's like, I don't see why business school is a step that needs to be in here. And it's going to cost more to go to business school for a year than to actually just try this. So, I mean, I didn't get into that school, and I agreed that she was right, that I had actually, I had done enough research, I'd talked to enough people, I bounced the idea off all these folks, and I didn't even realize that I'd kind of connected the circuit until she kind of turned on the light, and I was like, oh, it works. And so I was like, okay. That let me see that the opportunity to start Market Share was there. And the whole principle was that to build a public market like the one in my head, coming at it from the perspective of a developer was wrong. That a truly public market isn't developed, it's organized into being. So it really comes from the community first, not from designing the space. So what I thought was, I will start a nonprofit that takes the principles of grassroots political campaigning and reapplies them to building better public spaces, better public solutions. So that's what the idea of Market Share was. And then she said, well, why don't you just start that? I kind of looked at my situation, and I think then it became, well, why shouldn't I start it? There just really was not a single good reason. You know, I have my health, I have a supportive family, no dependents, a little bit of money saved up. I had a steady job at the senator's office that ended pretty promptly at 5 every day. So I had evenings relatively free to do this. So kind of just had all the right characteristics in my life where I should be the one to take that risk. You know? So just kind of started Googling how to start a nonprofit in Washington State, like literally, and started reading the Secretary of State's website. You know, how do you do this? What forms do I need to fill out? You know, okay, need a board of directors, need articles of incorporation, all that kind of stuff, and just kind of fumbled my way through it. Yeah, so that's how I started it.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Shout out to your friend who was like, just do it, because I think a lot of times it is our friends who are listening to our ideas that are like, that connect the dots for us, that are like, wait, but you don't need this gatekeeper to tell you you're good enough, and you don't need this piece of paper to validate you. Just do it.
I think it's because you're on the inside, so you see it from one way, but they're seeing it from the outside.
Right.
So they see it from a different perspective.
Absolutely. I want to go back. After high school, where did you go, and what did you want to do?
After high school, I went to Tufts University in Medford, Massachusetts, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. You don't want to like wish for a do-over for any part of your life, because like, you know, I'm pretty appreciative of where I've ended up.
For sure.
So you have to go through that.
Right.
But I'll be the first one to give myself, you know, outside of GPA, a pretty bad grade for college, because I didn't seize the opportunity. I mean, and I didn't know how. So like, I'm not kicking myself too much, because I remember where I was back then. And I think one of the things that held me back was that I didn't really know how to make and keep space in my life. So I think what I arrived at was what a lot of folks arrive at. Suddenly you're in a dorm, and where in high school you really had to put in a lot of effort to make time for relationships to form outside of school. I mean, you had to, you know, before you could drive, or if you didn't have a car, you got to ask the parents or figure out I mean, you have to make space.
Right.
And now you're constantly with other people. And so
Right.
I just started being quote unquote friends with the people I lived near. And it wasn't necessarily based on anything other than that proximity.
Right.
And so it took me most of college, 3 years, to realize that I needed to learn how to do the opposite, which is sort of not push people away in a confrontational way, but like make space and for the people I really, really wanted to get to know and keep them close, and then realize that other folks were acquaintances or
sure.
beyond. So I was just really moody, and my friends just called me emo, and you know, I was not going out very much. I do wish I had tried out for the a cappella group. I wish I had taken an intro drama class. I wish I had studied abroad.
Right.
And these were all opportunities that were just right there, but I was so in my head, as I have been in different periods of my life, that they didn't even seem real. They didn't seem like something I could even grab. Found some of my best friends in life my senior year. So, as I said, kind of a very important experience, very important place and time. So that's what I did. And I left college barely knowing what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to be of service to people. The most general thing. I didn't know which people, I didn't know how to serve. Like, I just knew that I had in my head this very, very basic equation that I still use. In living, there's a whole series of inputs, like the energy that I consume, the food, the opportunities, the support. Like, my existence takes something to make that possible. And then I have an output, whether, you know, outside of work or anything that I'm trying to do, but I have an output. My existence creates something into this world every day, all the time. It's never stopped. And so I wanted the final accounting of my life to be a net positive. So I haven't gone through this world consuming more than I end up leaving. So that's all I had. My mom said, I think you should go to the Peace Corps. And that was the best idea I had. So I was kind of in the midst of that process when a group in Cambridge, Massachusetts called World Teach, they have an office there, and I was on my way to my summer job, and I walked in off the street because I heard that they had international volunteer programs. And I talked to this guy who just took some time out of whatever he was doing to tell me about the organization. We chatted a bit. I said I wanted to go to their China program. And he said, well, you know, you'd be a good candidate for next year. And I'm like halfway out the door, and he goes, wait, can you leave next week? And I was like, for China? And he's like, no, for the Marshall Islands. And I was like, what are the Marshall Islands? And so he had to like get out a map and he showed me these. I don't even know if they were dots on the map. It's like the 6th or 7th smallest country in the world. And he said, we had a volunteer just drop out, and orientation's done. Teachers are already on ships going out to their outer placements. Would you go? And I said, you know, well, can you tell me a little bit? And he said, well, it's an outer island. It's a little bit of an extreme placement. So you're not going to have electricity. You're not going to be able to contact people, you know, electronically. You're going to cook on fires. You won't have running water. You'll spearfish. And as soon as he said spearfish, I was like, all right, I'm in. Like, okay,
What sold you?
that's good. And they bought me a plane ticket. Like, I literally left their office with a plane ticket. They took my word for everything that I said. And I went home and I sent them my Peace Corps essays and my medical forms. And a few weeks later, I was in the Marshall Islands. Yeah,
Right.
and so that's
So
kinda,
this happened right after graduation?
This happened a few months. It was the summer of 2008.
Wow.
A few months after graduation. Definitely was in a little bit of panic mode because
Yeah.
I didn't know how my Peace Corps application was going. So some intentionality, like I want to serve,
Right.
you know,
Right.
but a lot of, you know, good fortune as well.
Wow.
And somebody who's now in Seattle, and I just reconnected with him after all these years. his name is Dom Choi, and he gave me a chance.
Yeah.
On whatever he saw,
Yeah.
that guy walking into his office. So we reconnected just a few weeks ago, and so he changed my life in 15
Wow.
minutes.
Shout
so
out to that guy.
Wow.
yeah,
Shout out to that guy. And for folks
Right.
listening who don't know, where are the Marshall Islands?
if you draw a line from Hawaii to like Australia, there's somewhere about in the middle.
Okay.
So there's some of the most remote inhabited islands in the world. It's really very, very far away. And I think that there's more than 1 million square miles of ocean territory that the country has, and less than 70 square miles of land.
Wow.
Part of the
So-
Micronesian islands, right?
It's very close to Micronesia. Yeah.
Okay.
So
'Cause there's like a bunch of
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So there's a
Small
bunch of
island
coral
nations.
atolls. It's one of the most beautiful places. Dom told me that this would ruin tropical vacations for me forever, and he's correct.
Yep.
Like pristine, but a hard
Because
life
it's
too.
untouched, right?
It's really untouched. Like
Yeah.
you're on islands, where hundreds of people ever have stood on.
Yeah.
So it's like it's pretty pristine.
What did you learn about culture living in Boston?
I learned about my Asian identity. So I was born in San Francisco, and I lived there until I was 6. And I spoke English and 2 dialects of Chinese. And I had a caretaker who was from China, saw Asian people all the time. I actually didn't even know that. I went to a preschool where all the kids looked different. I mean, I had classmates of every color. And it wasn't until I went to Minnesota that I realized that, wow, like this is what it means to be different, and this is what it means to be picked on because of my race. So in Minnesota, I learned about my culture and kind of what being different meant. And then I came to Seattle, and there's a much larger Asian population. And in some ways, it's a little better integrated, I would say. So I took that for granted. And then when I got to college, again, kind of that socializing thing, I wound up just hanging out with whoever happened to be around. And I realized that I really missed being with other Asian Americans, other people of color who had a shared experience. I mean, sometimes it's just the food, right? Like, so being in college, I'll say, taught me that, because Tufts is a little bit outside of Boston. I mean, it's still a subway ride, but I didn't spend that much time in Boston. So I would say college near Boston taught me about my identity, but yeah, I don't know if Boston's taught me anything specifically.
Where did your love for food come from?
My father's mother was a really good cook, and so she lived in Sacramento when I was in San Francisco, so we got pretty regular access to that. So it kind of establishes the foundations of Cantonese cooking. But I think where I really started to appreciate and love food was when I started to live internationally, and I used food as the entry point every time I had a new community that I was living in. So like when I was in the Marshall Islands, I was on the deck of a freighter for 5 days to get to my island. So it's one of those like front loading ships, so they just kind of ram into the shore, and this front thing goes down, and all these kids just run on to the boat, and they're all picking up my luggage, and kind of this little pack of us is walking to my house. And literally the first thing, I haven't unpacked, I haven't done anything, my family's got a meal set out on the one table that they had out kind of in the yard, and there's this meal ready for me, and a chair, which they had actually borrowed from the school. It was actually a desk they borrowed from the school. And they had a meal ready for me. And so the first words of sort of real Marshallese conversation. People had given me some phrases, but where there was nobody around that was gonna back me up in English. You know, I was there surrounded by kids watching me eat, my host mother who had just made this food watching me. And so before I could speak any Marshallese, well, they were teaching me sort of the first words. They were telling me what all the food is. And then my way of kind of making my greeting was to really, really enjoy the food, like in an over-the-top kind of way. Really just like be expressive and be appreciative. And so food was definitely an entry into the community there. It was definitely a connection between my host mother and myself. We hunted for sea turtles and fish and sharks and lobsters and coconut crabs. So that was a huge bonding experience with my host dad and some of the other men on the island. And then a few times I got stuff shipped to me and cooked stuff for my family to try, which was kind of a kick for them too. So that was my first utilization of food as sort of a cultural bridge. And then I did it again in China, in every new location that I lived. And then when I came back as an organizer on the Obama campaign, you know, we had folks having food in our headquarters in the office where I was based was really important because people would connect over it, or there were people that didn't want to make phone calls or knock doors or weren't good with computers, but were incredible cooks. And they would bring great food in, and it just brought the entire team together. So I kind of just appreciate food for its ability to cut across just about everything and bring folks together. So yeah.
Nice.
I want to hear more about Marshallese food,
Okay.
but we can talk off record.
You can go wherever.
I want to hear more about that too.
Right? I'm like, man,
I
fish,
could-
everything? That's amazing.
Well, and I'm thinking about just that experience of like, you pull up, they've sat you down, given you this food, and both of you know I'm a super picky eater. So I'm like, what if you didn't really like the food? And like, when you obviously like that's a situation where it's like
I'll tell you a story.
You're like, I'm allergic. Oh no.
Well, so one night we had a bunch of somebody found some sea turtle eggs like buried in the beach, and so I come back and they're boiling in this pot, and my host father, you know, gets one out for me and kind of tells me to just open it up and eat it, and so I did, and it's like in the top 5 of worst things I've ever eaten. And it was like a grainy, off, watery egg. I mean, it was bad, and it was tough to keep it down. And he's like, "Oh, what do you think?" And I was like, you know, trying to be polite. I was like, "It's okay. Like, I don't know." And he's like, "We don't really like them." And I was like, "What?" You know, like, and I was like, "Why are we?" You know, because I guess like we're gonna eat. They're there, so you know, we're not gonna not eat them, I guess. But like, yeah. So he was just like, "Yeah, they're not very good. Like, chicken eggs are better." I'm like, "Yeah, they are, a lot better." So that was like the one story when you said things you didn't like. But mostly, I mean the fresh fish is, you know, really, really good. It just got a little bit, there wasn't much variety, you know? And so one of the tricks that I used to get by the monotony, or when there was something a little less palatable, was just to make myself a little hungrier. So I would just go and, you know, so I didn't exercise, because it's funny when you have a very calorie restricted diet, you don't waste it.
Right.
I don't mean like exercise is waste, but if you're going to do physical activity, it's like I would never just go for a run, you know, because I didn't have enough food to make that.
Right.
I lost 20 pounds when I was there for the year. So what I would do is they harvest coconut meat, and then they sell that, and people make it into oil and other products. So I would try to make copra, is what that's called. And so it's pretty labor intensive work. So I would do that for a while, or I would go and like try to spearfish for a bit so that there's some product of the physical exertion. Or, I'd go hang out with the kids and we would, just run around the island or whatever. But make yourself hungrier to make your food taste better. So that was definitely
Because you're so hungry, you don't care.
yeah,
Right.
I mean, it works. And but there were some delicious things. Coconut crab is really, really delicious. And it was one of my favorite activities to go and hunt for these things with my host father. During the day, if you've ever been snorkeling in a tropical place, it's like that, and you're swimming all around the reef. But we went at night too. And the reef is like another planet, and the fish are sleeping, so you can just swim right up to them and shoot them with your spear. So it makes that easier, but a lot of sharks come at night, so that's like the trade-off.
How big are these sharks?
Like people size.
Oh no.
Yeah. Nope. Yeah.
People.
The first time
I'm
You
good.
said it so calm too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
just-
no,
size
like you
of a
fight the
baby.
urge to like scream because you're underwater and you got you're holding your breath, and then you see a shark. Like it never became not unsettling for me.
Yeah.
So I didn't do it that much because it made me too tired to teach.
Yeah.
So
man.
night fishing was like a weekend activity, not a school night activity.
Okay. And were you teaching English?
That was my main job, but I ended up teaching a lot of other subjects too because I was the only one with very much formal education. So
Okay.
most stuff outside of Marshall's language class I would kind of help out with. But the thing that I was really proud of was a test prep class that I created for my 8th graders, because they had a high school entrance exam they had to take. And I think the national average was like 30% passage. And if you don't pass, your chances of just even continuing on so you'd go to another island to the high school. But the thing that really outraged me was when I found out that the test was administered by Scantron.
Wow.
And it's like, we have a little island without electricity, a little shack of a schoolroom with no supplies. It's hard enough to learn the subject matter in those conditions. And then the very first time that these kids are ever going to see this alien bubble sheet, their future in high school is dependent on that. And so I'm thinking, like, the barrier here is not even necessarily their knowledge or their proficiency in the subject. It's you write your name on this thing by filling in bubbles and so at mid-service I went to the Ministry of Education in the Capitol, and I procured an old test, so I knew what the format was going to be, and I also borrowed many Scantron sheets, little cards, distributed them to some of my other fellow teachers that were going back to their islands, and I said, I'm going to do a test prep class. So I brought back hundreds of Scantron cards so we could practice, and then I made a few versions of the test, new versions based on the one that I had borrowed. And then we just practiced. We practiced guessing. We practiced, all kinds of different testing, tricks, like strategies rather, not tricks. And then all of them passed.
Oh, wow.
So all eight of my 8th graders and one precocious 7th grader passed the exam.
Nice.
And went on to high school. And I haven't stayed with them, but that was more indicative of what I would say I was trying to do than necessarily just teach them English.
They were like, "What? All of them passed." Wait a minute.
Yeah. No, it was great, and I mean
That's
the
amazing.
community was happy, but really I wanted to be an interesting community member. There's only 250 people on my island.
Yeah.
Everybody knows everybody. Doors are always open. It's one little path, sandy path down this one part of the island. So, you're with your students and your community all the time.
Right.
So one of the things that I was really proud of that I stumbled upon accidentally. I tried to start an after-school program, called it the Island Guard, and it was specifically to try to help some of the adolescent males who didn't really have chores. Like the girls were supposed to do all kinds of stuff to make the house work, and the boys got into all kinds of trouble. So I was thinking, okay, what could we do with that time? So I had a bunch of tools and t-shirts, and t-shirts I had them made in the Capitol. I had a bunch of tools shipped out to me, and I came up with this idea that we would go around the island doing home improvement tasks. And a lot of the program it didn't really take, but a few of the kids really did enjoy building stuff, and so did I. So we actually ended up spending much of the last few weeks scavenging for like shipping pallets and fishing nets and things that kind of floated up, buoys, and then building furniture for folks, rebuilding a door. We built a bench, table, chairs, and then I remodeled my host mom's cookhouse on my very last night on island. And so my students and I worked into the night to make sure that this thing was finished, and it's still one of the things I'm like very, very proud of creating. But so it was not just classroom time. In fact, it was the whole time. What is my impact? What is my...
And how long were you there total?
10 or 11 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where did your love of just getting your hands dirty and making things, like, was that something that was done at home, or?
As far back as I can remember.
Yeah.
Like I think my family will back this up, that I would probably end up playing with the box that whatever birthday gift or Christmas gift would come in, more than like whatever was in the box. So the amount of cardboard and duct tape that I went through as a kid, it was massive, because I was always trying to literally build things. But also I had a lot of fun kind of organizing cousins and neighborhood kids to, I guess, like make believe kind of. We pretended we had an airport and casinos and grocery stores. We did Star Wars. Yeah, I mean, just anything we saw, I would try to like recreate. Yeah, all kinds of forts, airplanes, and we would all just role play. And I kind of instinctively felt like I was the one that was sort of casting the spell that would help everybody imagine where we were. This thing is the control panel. It's not like this baby toy that has, the alphabet on this, you know. And, this is where we're flying, and it's nighttime now. And so, I don't know. That just...
So, vivid imagination.
So is that why you wanted to try intro to drama?
Yeah. Actually, yeah. I mean, I'm still, like, if I can figure out a time in my life where I have a little more downtime, I would still love to find some kind of drama troupe and just like try that, know.
So if you know of a drama troupe, email us.
I know some drama people.
Right. I'm sure they will hit us up.
We teach drama class, though.
Cool.
So you get back stateside. How long until you ended up in China?
Oh, immediately. Like 2 weeks. So I
I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh, but I can imagine being home 2 weeks, being very bored, and saying, "So what's next?"
No, it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
It was the same program.
Yeah.
But a different site. So I had gone into that World Teach office asking about China. And so
Yes.
I knew I didn't want to be a teacher for another year. I actually wanted to be, I wanted to help the teachers. I wanted to be field staff. So after my year in the Marshall Islands, I applied to be field staff in China. And I didn't get the job, but they gave me a spot as a volunteer. So I thought, okay, I'll volunteer one more year and I'll teach, and then I'll apply again and try to be field staff. So I went from 64 students, no supplies, no culture of education, but all the time in the world, to 1,100 students per week, all the drive, all the culture of education in just 45 minutes with each class of 55 students once a week.
Wow.
So it's like you spend more time brushing your teeth in a week than 45 minutes. And so
Right.
what am I supposed to teach 55 kids
Right.
at a time?
You're like a robot.
Jeez.
Yeah, so that got me. I had to be a little more creative. I think that's where that was my first experience public speaking. I will say, because you get in front of, I had 22 classes a week, I think, and so you had to do the same lesson 22 times and keep it fresh. So it was easy for 1, 2, 3, but you get to lesson 17 of the same thing, and you're just like. And I did music. I recorded myself. I labeled everything in my kitchen in my dorm, in my little apartment, and then I would cook American food like grilled cheese, and so and I made my own little like cooking shows, which I would show in the classroom, because now we had the
Oh,
technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But how do I communicate in a compelling way to 55 kids in 45 minutes and get something memorable to stick? So it was totally different challenges. Literally inverse. Every advantage is now a disadvantage. Every disadvantage is now an advantage. So yeah, so I was a teacher in a middle school, teaching 1,100 seventh graders every week in a city called Changsha in Hunan province in China.
Nice.
So there was a 2-week break between the Marshall Islands and Changsha.
Wow.
So yeah.
I taught English in Japan
Yeah.
for 8 months. But it wasn't nearly the number of classes that you have. We maybe had 3 or 4 classes a day on like a bad day. But yeah, I was also not as creative as you either. But that's super awesome. That's
Yeah.
super awesome.
I mean, I did not learn all the students' names.
Yeah.
Understandable.
Right.
Understandable.
But some really, really wonderful connections. It was hard to keep it fresh, but usually once I got into the class, especially, there were some classes I liked more than others.
Yeah.
Each class had a personality.
Yeah.
And the ones that I got along with really well, you can find it, for your students to find some energy for them. So
How much freedom did you have?
in China,
Yeah.
With the curriculum or just in
With
general?
with the curriculum.
pretty much complete freedom. I mean, like there was a book, but you couldn't even get through one section of one lesson in 45 minutes.
Right.
So,
You had to get creative.
and it was oral English that I was supposed to be teaching them. So I tried to iron out some of the specific common errors, like mixing sounds up and this kind of stuff. Just things that'll help a little bit later on.
Yeah.
And so we just worked on that. We worked on having fun. Basketball helped a lot.
Been
I
there.
had like 12. They chose their English names. I had like 12 Kobe's in every class. Every boy. Okay, what name do you want? Kobe is like,
Yeah. It's
okay.
original.
Kobe 4.
Right. That's hilarious. And go ahead.
I had a question. What level of English did the students come in with?
It varied.
Okay.
Some with pretty much none, and they would try to hide and shrink into the back of the class. It was a prestigious school. So some of the students were there because their families had access, and
Right.
so you could
Yep.
tell that they had maybe traveled, that they had tutors.
Yep.
So some just came up to me on the first day just ready to have a
Hey,
conversation.
yeah, right, right.
So that was another challenge, was, again, how are you going to tailor a lesson to 55 kids with that kind of spectrum?
Right.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Right. Did you go through any culture shock yourself, being either on the Marshall Islands or in China?
I think going to the Marshall Islands was too fast to have shock. Yeah, and it was, there were really difficult times that year, but overall it was kind of delightful figuring out that way of living. I mean, I hated the mosquitoes. And like you're constantly, you know, you burned yourself on something, or you stubbed your toe, or you cut this, or you know, so you're never very comfortable. But overall, you know, I was bored much less on this remote island, at least how I remember, than I find myself maybe here some days. Culture shock in a big way coming back. I was sleeping on a very thin, like woven mat that was woven out of palm or coconut leaves on a concrete floor for my time there. So I couldn't sleep in beds for a few weeks after I got back. So like the first night back in my parents' place, I had to sleep on the floor next to my bed. So my folks found me next day and they're like, what happened? And then like overwhelming choice of things at the grocery store, of options to go out to eat, of sort of noise and speed, things, hot showers being just things were very built for the human being here. You know, like on my island, you noticed when you sat down in like a plastic chair, like a manufactured chair, because this is so fit to your body. Because a lot of the times you're just on the floor, or you're, you know, sitting on a stump, or a, you know, something that's not built for the human body. So I remember appreciating the chance to sit in manufactured plastic chairs. Like, wow, this is pretty nice. So that was big. And then it's kind of whiplash going to China. You know, Changsha is the, you know, it's, you know, like the 20th something largest city, but it's still like, I think 7 or 8 million people. Wow. So going to that, where you've got just endless choice, endless variety of food and things to do and places and people. But the culture shock in China was the worst, because to be Chinese American and to live in China is a really difficult place in my experience. So that was really the tough part for me.
Can you speak? I was gonna say, can you speak more on that?
Can you expand on that?
Yeah, it's a little hard, because that was, you know, the roughest part of my life, for sure, is the time that I spent in China, and for that reason. I don't know if I was naive. Some part of me thought that there was going to be like a homecoming kind of experience where I would reconnect with my roots. But one thing I learned living in China and going to China is how American I am, because I was not considered foreign or American, and also not Chinese. And so outside of my close Chinese friends, who had enough patience or vision or interest or whatever to form a relationship with me, it was really kind of difficult to find the right place. Many of my white friends, who I would normally associate with here, they enjoyed somewhat of an elevated status, almost like a celebrity status in China. And I think after a while, if you're continuously treated that way, it will kind of change you. It'll change your perspective. For me as well. I remember going to a club one night where everybody got in, and I was asked to pay a cover charge as a Chinese male. It wasn't just men. I mean, it was all the white men got into the club for free, all the Chinese women, but Chinese males didn't even bother, and people thought, you know, I was kind of crazy for even wanting to go in there. And it was quite a fee as well. I mean, and so I remember just thinking, this is so backwards. You know, I was asked to be the translator all the time, even though my Chinese was relatively, you know, much more advanced than most of my fellow teachers. You know, if you were white and you could say hello and order a beer, people are just like, wow, your Chinese is so good. And I'm over here, you know, talking about social issues or life or whatever, and they're like, why is your Chinese so bad? I'm like, you know what? So those were just sort of the everyday experiences, but I guess maybe I had the wrong expectations going in. But I just felt very lonely, and to be in a place with so many people, after being in a place with so few people,
Right.
it was perplexing and disappointing and profoundly depressing to spend that much time feeling so lonely and so disconnected.
Yeah.
So that was a difficult experience.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I went through something very similar in Japan. Just super excited to have gotten there, and then kind of thinking in the back of my mind what it meant to be African American in this homogenous country. Overall, really enjoyed the experience, but I think being in a city that was so far away from Tokyo, you just got different things in different places, from stereotypes to, and it wasn't necessarily even just the locals as much as it was also, like from the other teachers, and seeing how they were put on this pedestal, and like and watching
The other white
teachers who were from like England and Australia, who were put on this pedestal. And then it was just like looking at me sideways, like, I don't know what to do with you.
I don't know about now, but back in the day, if you wanted to teach English in Japan, if you were Japanese or looked not white, you wouldn't get the job.
Yeah.
They didn't care. They're like, oh, you're white? Okay, yeah, you can speak English, even though you can have a very poor grasp of the language.
Yeah.
They didn't care.
There's a lot of sketchy stories about
There was a company that went out of
companies.
business.
Yeah, there's so many
there's-
sketch
yeah.
stories about
Yep.
teaching English. So if you're
Yep.
thinking about teaching English abroad, please do your research.
Well, and the other thing too is in China, all the folks that are able to, get that sort of the VIP treatment, that's going away. Because we all know. I mean, look at this campus here. How
Right.
many Chinese
Right.
students are here?
Right.
They're
lot.
They're learning English,
Right.
and so they're going back to China with both skill sets.
Right.
Why are they going to hire, an American who can only speak English,
Right.
can't speak Chinese?
Right.
So
Yeah.
you really need to be able to do both.
Step up your game.
To be able to compete. So there's definitely a lesson in that.
So get your foreign language up.
That's right.
And do,
I mean,
and
you
do
should
your
know a foreign
Googles.
language anyway.
Yeah.
Very
Do your
good
Googles.
skill to have.
I suggest Marshallese. Very useful.
Right.
I'm always translating for people.
Nice.
I heard they
That's
have
funny. That's hilarious.
they have some Japanese words in their
They
vocabulary.
do. How did you know that?
Because there was one Marshallese guy that he was in a program. Anyways,
So I want to go back to market share.
Okay.
And as we wrap up, when did you take the leap into entrepreneurship? Like the full leap?
I took my first leap in Beijing. I tried to start a restaurant with a friend.
wow.
That idea was formed mostly over beers, too many beers.
Okay.
It just never even got close to off the ground. It was just the most unbaked idea ever, and it fell flat on its face, and is a lot of why I ended up back in my parents' house on Mercer Island
Yeah.
after spearfishing for my food. Like that kind of independence to back to
Yeah.
my high school room. And I was working at a warehouse down in Kent. Really fortunate that
Shout out to
knew some
Kent.
folks. Yeah, really fortunate that I knew some folks down there that gave me that job. And it was kind of organizing their warehouse and shipping off, mostly auto parts and stuff. But it left me questioning, what I had done all these things for.
Yeah.
So that was the first time I took a really, really off-balance plunge and landed exactly how you'd expect. So this market share thing is the second,
Okay.
and so far I haven't hit the ground yet, and I
Nice.
don't think I'm going to
Yeah.
this time, but we're still fighting. I mean, we're still not out of the woods.
Yeah.
So I think the plunge was that conversation with that friend when she said,
Nice.
"Why don't you just start it?" And I was
Just
like,
do it.
"Yep."
Nice, nice. How can community get involved with what you're doing?
There are all kinds of ways. If you have millions of dollars that you're looking to donate, just contact me and I will pretty much drop everything and talk to you, because there are significant capital costs to building a market like this. So that's sort of the top level need. We
Yep.
need folks that have the resources that want to build a new civic institution.
Nice.
So joking, not joking.
Yep.
But then I really think about it like a truly public ancient market, essentially an open space, relatively convenient for everybody to set up whatever it is they want to do or go and find whatever it is they need. That's the starting point. And so what we're trying to do in this space is lower the barriers that would prevent a low-income immigrant or refugee from starting a business that's mostly capital, language, business expertise, and facilities. So we really take all four of those down to a significant degree if we are successful in building this space. So once we lower those barriers and some folks compete for the spots, and we have really interesting food in there and people that are running real businesses, this is asset-based community development. This is not like they're taking a risk. Like, they're gonna have skin in the game. They're gonna be working their butts off like anybody in the service industry knows. That's what they're going to sign up for. So there's no free ride in this. But after that, the question about how the community can get involved, right now, talking about this possibility, connecting with Market Share, interacting with us on social media, contacting us to volunteer. Everybody has a way to help us build this market, or everybody has a vested interest in one day spending time there. Unless you really detest food, unless you really detest being around energy and people and vibrant urban spaces, and I guess some people would, and so this is not for them, but for the vast majority of people, if this is something you can see as being positive and even in these times absolutely necessary for this city, then I encourage you to contact me, contact Market Share, and connect with me and our other volunteers to figure out how we can plug you in. I don't know what the listener's skill set is, but I know that there's a place for the listener to help. And so we just need to talk and figure out where that is. But yeah, everything helps.
And how can people connect with you on social media?
You can find us on Facebook, but our website is marketshareseattle.org, and we've got links to our Facebook from the website. I don't know what the URL is. I think you can search Market Share on Facebook and we should come up. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. Those aren't as active. Facebook is definitely our most active platform. We are going to be sort of launching a rebrand of ourselves pretty soon, so it'll be really fun to come out with a more focused message. There's a lot going on in what we're doing, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about how to organize all of that so that people understand it more easily. And then we are hopefully going to have an outdoor meal. We're trying to have it on the plaza of King Street Station later this summer. So we're in the preliminary stages, but so far everything's looking good. So it's going to be a fundraising event for us, but also sort of a community civic food activity. So we'll be selling tickets for that. So when those go on sale, definitely, bring friends, come experience what should be possible every night that the weather's nice, is that we should be able to eat outside there. And then every day indoors at that station, we should be able to hang out and connect over food.
What's the biggest lesson you've learned on this journey?
Always go back to the community when you don't have the answer.
It's really good. I like that.
The answer's out there somewhere.
Love that.
That's really good. Yeah.
Cool.
Favorite places to eat around Seattle? Kind of food-ish centric.
Dominique and I, we both the Huiki Mi Kya. Sorry to the owners if we didn't get the name right, but
HKMG.
HKMG 12th and Jackson.
Yes.
Butter fried chicken wings and the braised duck leg soup is my go-to there. I have to shout out Terra Plata up on Capitol Hill on Melrose. It's part of the Melrose Market building. Tamara Murphy is the chef and a friend and a mentor, advisor to me in my role at Market Share. And her own journey is really inspiring as an entrepreneur. So, she shared a lot about her early days fighting for her place in this city's food scene, and so she's recognized as sort of one of the originals. So her food is really globally inspired. It's delicious. It's the best ingredients, and they have a killer rooftop on top of the restaurant. So a really great spot in the summer. I think there's my favorite taco truck. I don't know the name, but it's right at 12th and King.
Yes.
So it.
In
So
the
good.
parking lot.
Yeah, there's a parking lot, and they've created a little sort of wood awning
Yeah.
So
that you can
good.
sit. And like I've checked out a few taco trucks around town, and the service is great, and that is one good carnitas burrito.
Nice.
You know Bakeman's downtown?
No.
Their pie. See, that would be me hitting the table.
Yeah.
His pie. I don't know what I had. Amazing.
Bakeman's is exactly the kind of old school lunch counter that you just wish there were more of, and it's actually fun. Like that staff is they'll give it to you if you're taking too long in line, and it's cash only. But it's one of my favorite places to have lunch downtown. I have to kind of do an RIP, rest in peace, to my favorite restaurant, which was Hing Loon in the International District. It used to be on Maynard Street, and it was really home-style, traditional Cantonese food from like the region where my grandmother was from. And they just, they had wonderful servers, and it was just a very comfortable little spot to be. And they had some really, really wonderful dishes that reminded me of growing up. And they went out of business or were sold many, many years ago now, like probably 3 or 4 years ago. So I just remember them. So shout out to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you both. This is
Thank you.
really
Super
cool.
fun.
This is a fun topic. Culture is a fun topic of conversation to
Absolutely.
kind of just reflect over. So
Nice.
thanks for doing this.
Thank
and I
you.
will share this podcast far and wide.
Yes. Cool.
Yay!
Thanks, you too.